Hi, my name is Mandarin Kim, and today I wanted to do a video about sexual orientation, but in planning it I realised that I also needed to do something about gender as well, because it kind of relates to what I wanted to say. So this video really is about both gender identity and sexual orientation, and it's kind of also about the labels we use and whether they are useful or necessary or sufficient to describe the complex reality of human nature. Firstly, I wanted to get the obvious stuff out of the way about sexual orientation. That an adult should be able to choose consensual sexual activities and or romantic relationships with another adult, no matter what gender of the two people involved, without it being viewed as wrong or judged by other people. And that you can't, basically, with regards to sexual attraction and sexual desire, you can't really choose it, so we shouldn't really talk about it as a choice. Those things really should be obvious in this day and age by now, I would hope. But moving on, yeah, sexual orientation. Surely it's simply a matter of whether you're gay or straight or bi, right? Well, it might not be quite as simple as that. And in order to explain why, I need to look a little bit in detail about gender again. So there's physical sex, the biological gender differences between male and female. This is an empirical scientific fact, there's no doubting that. But even then, it's not quite as simple and straightforward as we like to believe. There are, after all, intersex people, and there is variation within people with regards to their hormones. Both men and women, by the way, produce both testosterone and estrogen, just in different amounts. And the exact amounts can vary from person to person, so there's a lot of human variety, even when it comes down to physical gender. And then there's social gender. This is the placing of people into the gendered categories man and woman, and the associated roles and appearance codes connected with those categories. And this really is an interpretation of gender created by and enforced by society. And here's something else that's an empirical fact: the natural diversity of human nature. And this natural diversity of human nature creates situations where A. rigid roles and stereotypes hurt people who differ from them due to their natural temperament. B. People may wish to express their gender, i.e. their appearance, in ways contrary to their assigned role. And C. Some people may feel as if their true nature does not fit comfortably into the category of man or woman assigned to them. Plus there is something else. D. There are also some instances where a person strongly feels that they should be in a differently gendered body to the one they were born with. This last one, I feel, should be considered really a biological issue as well, because it seems to be a firm conviction that is felt from an early age and exists independently of whatever other social issues may or may not be evident, i.e. a transsexual woman might feel that although they were born physically male, that they should be in a physically female body. This may be the case even though they may be quite tomboyish in their gender expression, for example. Because it's a firm conviction that seems to come from an early age and seems to exist independently of how typically or non-typically gendered the person is, it's probably in the brain. The brain is telling that person that they're in the wrong body. Whether the gender categories or roles are or used to be necessary in society, i.e. whether these categories of man and woman and the roles associated with them are now or have ever been in the past, even if they're not anymore, necessary to society or not. Maybe they're not necessary, maybe they never have been. But whatever is the case about that, it is still true that the world we currently live in has these categories and roles, and that some people do not feel comfortable in the category and roles assigned to them, and they need to move through the world as the gender that they feel fits their natural temperament. Whether that's the other gender to the one they were assigned, or whether it's a different category of gender. And this is because the social categories do not have a necessary connection with the empirical biology of a person. Remember, it was an interpretation created by society in the first place. And as a result of all the above, 4 things are necessary in a humane, caring society. 1. That rigid roles and stereotypes need to be rejected in favour of more flexible, less stereotyped roles. 2. People need to be allowed to express themselves through clothing and appearance in whatever way feels natural to them without stigma. 3. We need to show compassion towards those who feel conflict between their true nature and the category and role assigned to them, and where the first 2 measures are not sufficient for their comfort, we need to allow them to move through the world and identify as the gender that feels most appropriate to them. And 4thly, we need to also allow the option to physically transition for those who do feel conflict between their brain sex and other aspects of their biological gender. The adoption of these 4 measures is what has caused the complexity and variety of gender identity in our society at present. From mere gender non-conformity, through cross-dressing and androgyny, through transgender, genderqueer, non-gender identities, all the way to transsexuality. And because of this complication, sexual orientation is also complicated. And also because of these various issues that I'd like to highlight now. We are physically sexually attracted to people based on their gender expression and their biological sex, i.e. how they look, what they look like, and what bits and pieces they have. Not their gender identity, which is what's up here, and which technically is what is man and woman. So this complicates things. Also, people can be flexible on some of these, but rigid on others. For example, I might be very rigid about only liking people who are physically male, but totally don't mind whether they present masculinely or femininely. On the other hand, I might be very rigid about I'm only attracted to people who look feminine, but don't really mind whether they're physically male or physically female. And of course some people can be flexible about all of it, and of course some people can be rigid about all of it. But this complicates things. And then raw sexual desire and the need and desire for romantic relationships are 2 totally separate things. And you can have both together, of course, a sexual romantic relationship. But you can have one without the other. You can have casual sex, which is sex without the romantic relationship. Or you can have a romantic relationship without sex and be perfectly content and happy with that, like cuddle buddies. Plus, people can be flexible about one thing and not the other. For example, some people will only form romantic relationships with women, but they're happy having sex with men or women. Or you could be rigid about both, but differently. Maybe you only have romantic relationships with men, but only have sexual experiences with women. And of course, some people are flexible about both, and some people are rigid about both in exactly the same way. They only do sex or romance with women, or with men. But there's a variety there. In a way, sexual orientation is not just about sex. It's about sex and romance, and the 2 are not necessarily lining up the same way. These sexual orientation categories are also complicated by the fact that a person's own gender category may not fit comfortably into the category of man or woman. They may identify some other way. Well, how then can you call it straight or gay? Because it's not, those categories don't just talk about what gender person you're sexually attracted to, but also what gender you are. But also the person you're sexually attracted to, their gender identity may not fit comfortably into man or woman. They might fall outside of the binary, or their biological sex and or gender expression may not match their identity. And this also makes the labels to describe sexual orientation kind of misleading and kind of insufficient. So for these reasons, I believe the simple categories of gay, straight or bi are simplistic. They're naive, and they're really insufficient to describe the true complexities of human variety of gender and sexual orientation. We probably need a new way to think about and classify sexual orientation. Or we need to loosen up about it all and simply accept that if a person is consensually, sexually or romantically interested in another person, then it is nobody else's business really, and does not necessarily require a label. I mean, why do you need to tell yourself or other people who you're allowed to get sexually attracted to? Surely you just are sexually attracted to people and you follow your instincts, and as long as they're into you as well, it's all cool. Any label should be a description, a way of looking at it and going, oh, interestingly it's that. But do we really need to have labels in that kind of rigid way about that? Though I do totally get why, in a frequently homophobic society, you might need communities and groups organised around some of these identities to basically fight for gay and bisexual rights and form their own communities of support. So that's the complexity of the world we live in. And talking about the complexity of the world we live in, as opposed to perhaps some idealised, labelless world, a lot of people complain about how confusing and complicated all these labels have gotten. Well, I've got a little bit of something I thought about that. People create a world in which what a person has between their legs governs how they are supposed to dress and what role they are supposed to play in society and what people and body parts they are allowed to get sexual with. And when some people complain about that and say, hey, that's rubbish, and another group of people also complain about that, and yet another group of people also complain about that, suddenly people say that things have got awfully complicated and confusing. But you stick people in rigid boxes, and some people pop up and say, we don't fit in those rigid boxes. So then what does society do? It creates other rigid boxes to put those things in. They didn't ask for these stereotypes or for the definitions to be that limiting, but people create this gay box and this cross-dresser box and this transsexual box. And then other people step up and say, I don't fit neatly into that, I'm bisexual or I'm genderqueer or whatever. Always using words not as rigid boxes and labels, but just to explain and describe how I don't fit into the boxes that are already there. And then what do? We create another rigid box. Who created the boxes? Who created this confusing and complicated world in the first place by creating so many rules for people to follow? Because it's actually very simple. People are free to be themselves and do what makes them happy, because it doesn't hurt anyone else. I think we sometimes need labels to describe things. I think we should stop letting them be these rigid things that control us and try and stay true to that basic philosophy. If what you do makes you happy and doesn't hurt anyone, then you're free to be yourself. And if you're curious about me, I identify not as a man or a woman, but as in between. Androgynous. Intergender. Genderqueer. I also prefer to express femininely or androgynously, but practically speaking I sometimes also need to express masculinely sometimes, like at work for example. I'm not that fully out yet. And I am physically male, which is as unimportant to me as any other superficial external thing. And my sexual orientation, in case you're curious, I am flexible about what anatomy people have, whether they're physically male or physically female. I am also flexible about how someone identifies, whether they identify as a man or a woman or non-binary. What I'm less flexible about is gender expression. It's not a rule, it's more an observation. So, but I don't seem to be attracted to masculinity, whether it's women who look butch or men that look, you know, macho. I'm not attracted to masculinity at all, it seems, but I do tend to be attracted to both androgyny and femininity. Again, whether it's men, women or non-binary people who demonstrate those expressions. So, that's the complexity and the flexibility of my own sexual orientation. And that's all really. Labels, who needs them? Well, we sort of do, to describe and talk about things, but yeah, they shouldn't be rigid, controlling boxes. But we shouldn't get annoyed by the labels people adopt, because that's also them trying to explain and describe who they are, and we need to be compassionate about the huge variety of human nature that really exists in the world. So, thank you.